It's the height of the Red Scare. The Rosenbergs sit powerless in the courtroom as the government presents misleading evidence. They are accused of being communists and providing the blueprints of the atomic bomb to the Soviet Union. The case against them relies completely on the testimony of 5 alleged co-conspirators. There is no physical evidence. The only way the Rosenbergs can escape the death penalty now is to convince the jury that those 5 witnesses are lying. To see all the prosecution's evidence, watch the previous part. We start with the positive evidence that they are innocent. There isn't any. Let me amend that slightly. There is some, but not much. Both the Rosenbergs testified that they were not spies and not involved in a conspiracy in any way. In terms of exonerating evidence, saying you didn't do it is not particularly strong. But at the same time, if the only evidence against you is 5 people saying that you did do it, with 2 of those 5 individuals admitting that they couldn't even directly connect you to the conspiracy, all of a sudden, 2 people saying they didn't do it doesn't seem so bad after all. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg acknowledged that they regularly visited the Greenglasses, but they never recruited Ruth Greenglass into a spy ring, and they never received any nuclear secrets from David Greenglass. Julius also admitted to visiting Ellicher in Washington, D.C., but he was just visiting an old college classmate. Julius never asked Ellicher to betray the US Navy. There is nothing wrong with friends and family meeting each other and having dinner together. It was the prosecution that claimed that many of these meetings were a big deal. In fact, 4 of the overt acts were literally just the Rosenbergs meeting with the Greenglasses. What's wrong with that? Ethel Rosenberg is David Greenglass's older sister. People can have family meetings without being in a conspiracy or sending nuclear secrets to Russia. At the end of the day, there were 4 people having dinner. The Rosenbergs say only innocuous conversations were had, and the Greenglasses claim an evil conspiracy was hatched. As the defendants, the Rosenbergs get the presumption of innocence, and it takes more than a he said she said dispute to overcome that. Furthermore, the Greenglasses have some serious credibility problems. The Rosenbergs testified about the tough times that the Greenglasses were having in the weeks leading up to their arrest. It started just before Ruth Greenglass moved out to Albuquerque to be with her husband. She told Julius that David was considering stealing things from the military and selling them to make some extra money. Julius discussed this with his wife Ethel, and they both told Ruth to tell David not to do it. Everything seemed fine for a while then. The Rosenbergs assumed that David had considered stealing some army gasoline, but decided against that after speaking to his wife. They never would have suspected that David would even have access to nuclear secrets, let alone sell them. But later, in the months before David was arrested, both the Rosenbergs testified that he started looking disheveled and was asking Julius for money. He even went as far as to blackmail Julius after Julius told him that he didn't have any money to give him. He said, "Well, Julie, I just got to have the money, and if you don't get me that money, you're going to be sorry." Shortly after that conversation, David was arrested and accused Julius of being a spy. There were also other reasons that David held a grudge against the Rosenbergs. Julius and David had started a company together. They had a machine shop where David used his previous experience to work as a foreman, and Julius was the salesman. Julius had connections in the engineering world and would get contracts for equipment which David and the employees would then produce. Quite quickly, disputes started to arise due to slow business. David claimed that there was nothing to do since Julius wasn't getting contracts, and Julius claimed that customers were not coming back because David was a bad foreman and their products were of poor quality. Julius even went as far as forcing David to drop out of night school so he could focus fully on the business, and even temporarily hired a foreman to look over David. That was particularly offensive to David, since it meant that a simple company employee would order him, a founding partner of the company, around. David and Julius argued all the time, and it even resulted in David physically assaulting Julius. Eventually, David decided to leave the company, but being one of the founding partners, he had invested thousands of dollars and still controlled a third of the company's shares. Julius wanted David to quit and to forfeit his stock, while David wanted Julius to pay him out. After months, they agreed that Julius would give David $1,000 for his share of the company. But that debt was given a low priority as Julius had other investors he had to pay back first. David never got a single cent of that $1,000. Even after falsely accusing the Rosenbergs of spying and being locked up, David Greenglass asked his lawyer to sue the Rosenbergs for that $1,000. This hatred clearly ran deep. But that's not too surprising. On cross-examination, Block exposed Ruth and David Greenglass's obsession with money. The Greenglasses spied for money. They admitted it. They were given money whenever they provided information to the Russians. At first, it was a couple $100, but when Greenglass was arrested, he had $4,000 in cash. He used that money to get a lawyer. Now, the Greenglasses claimed that this money was a last-minute infusion to help them escape the USA, but that's counteracted by the fact that they didn't leave. They claimed that they used some of that money to pay back debts to friends, but when questioned on it, David admitted that he didn't reimburse anyone. He used that money to have a better standard of living. Even after he got multiple raises when his army rank increased, he continued to hand over information in exchange for cash. He now claims to be remorseful, but he has not forfeited any of the money. The Greenglasses sold out their country for money. They used spying to live beyond their means. This brings us to an example of how Greenglass's testimony clashes with reality. The Greenglasses claimed that the Soviets, through the Rosenbergs, gave them thousands of dollars for their covert activities. So the FBI go to what they expect to be the Rosenbergs' luxury apartment filled with huge sums of cash. That would make sense. That would line up with David's claims that the Rosenbergs were high up and important spies for the Soviet Union. But what do the FBI find? The Rosenbergs are broke. The whole time this apparent conspiracy is going on, they are living in a one-bedroom apartment where they are paying $50 a month in rent. Julius was running a failing business and was even going into debt to repay the initial investors. The prosecution tried to claim that the Soviets gifted the Rosenbergs luxury goods, but all they could muster was a console table that the Rosenbergs actually bought for $21 from Macy's, and watches, some of which Julius bought for under $30, and one that was gifted to him by his late father. If you want to know how confident the prosecution are in the credibility of these claims, it says a lot that they didn't even bother putting the watches into evidence. The reality of it is that the Soviets never gave the Rosenbergs any gifts. The prosecution is just grasping at straws. Reality doesn't line up with what the Greenglasses claimed. That certainly undermines their credibility. David is also generally just a very contemptible character. He was a United States soldier who sold out his country. He broke his oath to protect the United States, and when asked about the oath he took, he admitted that he didn't even consider it when he decided to hand over the secret documents. Even years later, in court while being cross-examined, he doesn't even remember what the oath was about. As an extra betrayal, he was honorably discharged from the army before any of his spying came to light. So he got to live as an honorable former military man for many years, even though he had actually conned the military and hated his country. David Greenglass is truly a detestable person. He is almost completely without virtue. But there is one quality he does profess, which the defense agrees he possesses. He loves his wife. He agreed that he loved his wife more than he loves himself. But it is this which exposes his biggest reason for lying. David Greenglass lied not only to save himself, but also to protect his wife. Ruth Greenglass has not been indicted, and unlike Ethel Rosenberg, she is free and taking care of her children. David, by implicating the Rosenbergs, gave the FBI somebody else to focus on. The Rosenbergs were easy targets too. David knew that Julius had lost his government job due to his affiliation with the Communist Party. Put that alongside David's business grudge with Julius, and we can see exactly why he falsely accused the Rosenbergs. When David was arrested, he needed to put the blame on somebody else to get some leverage to save himself and his wife. He can't turn Harry Gold in. He was already arrested. In fact, it was Gold that led the FBI to David in the first place. So he blames Julius, and for good measure, he also sells out Ethel, his own sister. Ruth lied for the same reason. She is not in jail. She is raising her children. Looking back at it now, the fact that the Greenglass' stories match so closely is honestly suspicious. It looks like they planned out their testimony, memorized it, and then regurgitated it on the witness stand. On cross-examination, the defense asked Ruth to recount her initial meeting with the Rosenbergs, where they asked her to enlist David to spy for them. Ruth used almost identical verbiage as she did when she initially told the story on direct examination. Here is her cross testimony with her direct testimony on the left.
Julius said that I might have noticed that he and Ethel had not been openly participating in any Communist Party activities, that they hadn't been buying the Daily Worker at their usual stand. He told me that David was working on the atomic bomb, that the atomic bomb had dangerous radiation effects, that it was the most destructive weapon used to date, that Britain was working with the United States on this project, that the information had not been shared with the Soviet Union, that he felt that for scientific purposes it should be shared with the Soviet Union, so that one nation couldn't use the weapon as a threat against another. And he told me the type of information he wanted me to get from David, that David would consent to pass it on. He said that he wanted a physical description of the project at Los Alamos, and the approximate number of people working there, who the prominent scientists were, how the place was camouflaged, what the security measures taken were, what David's work in particular was, and the distance of the project from Santa Fe and Albuquerque.
She obviously memorized that, which makes you wonder if Ruth needs to memorize her story because it didn't actually happen, and David tells the same story. That would mean that he's lying too. The Greenglasses lied about the Rosenbergs. David Greenglass is a money-hungry traitor who is trying to save his own skin by making up stories about his sister and the brother-in-law that he hates. The Greenglasses' testimony is inconsistent with the physical evidence of the Rosenbergs' financial state, and there is no corroborating evidence of the Rosenbergs' involvement. The Greenglass testimony proves nothing, and it definitely doesn't prove the Rosenbergs guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Elizabeth Bentley is another interesting case. She claims that she was a spy, then a double agent for the FBI, and now apparently an espionage expert. Since she left the Communist Party, she has made a living off her supposed past life. She gives lectures about communism and is writing a book for which her publisher has given her an advance of $3,000. That's pretty good motivation to invent a Soviet spy ring. Furthermore, the Rosenberg trial is a massive media event and a great way for Bentley to get back into the spotlight. Bentley also does not directly accuse Julius Rosenberg of espionage. She admitted on cross-examination that the phone calls from somebody calling themselves Julius came from a voice she didn't recognize. Furthermore, spies use codenames all of the time. It seems ridiculous that a super covert spy who is recruiting his family and sending nuclear secrets to Russia would also use his real name and real occupation when identifying himself. It's all a bit silly and reeks of plausible deniability. If the trial goes well for the Rosenbergs, and it is obvious that they are not spies, then Bentley can say, "Fair enough, I guess it was a different Julius on the phone." Bentley puts plausible deniability in her story because, in all honesty, she doesn't know if the Rosenbergs are actually guilty. Maybe she doesn't care. She just wants to be in the newspapers so that she can make more money off her lectures and sell more copies of her book. It's also worth remembering that Bentley never heard of Sobell or Ethel Rosenberg, so even if her testimony is taken as true, it does not prove the case against the two of them at all. Ethel Rosenberg also wasn't mentioned by Max Ellicher, but for Sobell, Ellicher was the only witness that accused him of being part of the conspiracy. Why would Ellicher make up a confession? Even according to him, the only people that could connect him to the conspiracy are Sobell and Julius Rosenberg, and they certainly are not accusing him of being part of the conspiracy. Well, it all comes down to a single box that was ticked on a form years previously. Ellicher wasn't brought in for questioning by the FBI on suspicion of espionage. He was brought in related to perjury. In 1947, he signed a loyalty pledge to the United States government. He had to do that to keep his job at the Bureau of Ordnance for the Navy. In that pledge, he attested that he was not currently and had never been a member of a group that sought to overthrow the government by force or violent means. These pledges were common at the time as a way to root out communists in government departments. Ellicher signed that statement in 1947, and he knew he was lying since he had been a member of the Communist Party. He perjured himself and now openly admits it. So the FBI brought him in for questioning. Ellicher knew he was guilty of perjury. He also knew that other communists had gotten jail time for the exact same crime. So what does he do? He makes up a story about Julius Rosenberg and Morton Sobell. Ellicher was interrogated by the FBI after Julius was arrested, and on cross-examination, Ellicher admitted that he had read the newspaper stories about Julius Rosenberg and David Greenglass. So, to save his own skin, he makes up a story which further implicates Rosenberg, and it works. The prosecution has another witness that says Julius is guilty. They get to create charges against Sobell, who they think is running away to Mexico, and Ellicher wasn't arrested or indicted for perjury. Everybody wins, except for the innocent defendants who might go to jail or be executed. By the way, at the trial, it came out that Ellicher was being treated by a psychiatrist. Specifically, it was a kind of marriage counselling. Obviously, this wouldn't really matter much now, but back in the 50s, there was a huge stigma around this kind of thing, and it would be difficult for a jury member to believe anything said by somebody who is mentally ill. So, the defense certainly used that to their advantage. The defense does also have some other arguments that hold up better nowadays, so we'll end that side note there. There is one part of Elicher's story that just doesn't sit right. Prior to the alleged conspiracy, Elicher knew Sobell well, but he was just former classmates with Julius. There was actually quite a large amount of testimony about how Julius and Max had only met once since graduating, and even on that occasion, they simply happened to bump into each other at a public pool and barely spoke. So, if Sobell and Rosenberg truly are in a conspiracy and they want to recruit Elicher, why on earth would Rosenberg be the one to pitch it to him? Elicher said it was strange when Rosenberg, an old classmate, called him out of the blue. Elicher actually had to specify that he thought he still remembered him. So Rosenberg comes over to dinner and tries to convince Elicher to join the conspiracy, and in an attempt to persuade him to join, he tells Elicher that Sobell is also in the conspiracy. Obviously, Rosenberg recognized that Elicher would be more comfortable with the conspiracy if he knew that his good friend Sobell was involved. Then why not get Sobell to pitch the conspiracy to Elicher in the first place? Furthermore, after the meeting with Rosenberg, Elicher makes no attempt to contact Sobell to see if what Rosenberg told him is true. He waits until they happen to go on a holiday together and asks him then. Elicher is lying to save his own skin. His story makes no sense and there is no physical evidence. And his ridiculous testimony is the entirety of the evidence against Morton Sobell. Well, there is also the trip to Mexico, but that trip is only suspicious if one assumes that Sobell is part of the conspiracy and trying to evade the authorities. There is nothing wrong with going to Mexico. That's not a crime. Sobell's time in Mexico also has nothing in common with the escape plans that David Greenglass described. David said it would be a couple of days in Mexico, then the Soviet embassy would give him a fake passport and a trip to Switzerland or Sweden. Does this in any way resemble Sobell renting an apartment for his family and running around to different cities for a couple of days? As for the fake names, that's also not illegal. One can use fake names if one wants. It only sounds suspicious if one assumes that Sobell is secretly in Mexico and trying to elude the FBI. But that wasn't the case. Sobell told his friend William Danziger that he was going to Mexico. He flew to Mexico using his own name, and he booked the apartment in Mexico City using his own name. He didn't flee to Mexico, he went to Mexico. Sobell had no reason to flee. He had no reason to believe the FBI were after him. He was not part of any conspiracy and did not provide any information to the Soviet Union. Unlike the Rosenbergs, Sobell chose not to testify at the trial. This is completely understandable considering that there is even less for him to explain. There is almost no evidence tying him to the conspiracy in the first place. Looking at the totality of the prosecution's evidence, even if one thinks that it is possible that the defendants are guilty, it was not proven beyond a reasonable doubt. There is no physical evidence proving that the conspiracy existed or that any of the defendants are involved. Harry Gold and Elizabeth Bentley only indirectly implicated Julius Rosenberg. Morton Sobell's involvement is only alleged by one witness, and there are many good reasons not to believe Max Elicher. As for Ethel Rosenberg, only the Greenglasses claim that she was involved. The Greenglasses are two separate people using one made-up story. That is not proving someone's involvement beyond a reasonable doubt. Even for what they claim that Ethel did. They say that she was present and typing notes. She literally did less than Ruth Greenglass, who convinced David to spy and transported information from Albuquerque to New York. Ruth is completely free and unindicted, yet Ethel is facing the death penalty because she refuses to lie and blame her innocent husband. If you add together no physical evidence with unreliable witnesses, you get a prosecution case that wasn't proven. And it certainly wasn't proven beyond a reasonable doubt. It wasn't proven to such an extent that one would be so sure of somebody's guilt that they should be executed. The Rosenbergs and Morton Sobell are not guilty. Except the prosecution gets to go last, and after the defense puts forward their case, the prosecution still gets to set the record straight. After they testified, the Rosenbergs were immediately caught in a massive lie. They claimed that they never told the Greenglasses to get passport photos, and that they themselves never got passport photos taken. But the FBI found the camera shop right next to the courthouse where Ben Schneider worked. He testified that Julius and Ethel Rosenberg came on a Saturday and had 36 passport-sized photographs taken. Schneider claims that Julius told him that they were going to France to look after a property that Ethel had inherited. Julius lied on that occasion. He was having photos taken to give to the Soviets to be used in fake passports. The reason that the Rosenbergs were caught out by Schneider is because the FBI didn't find him until after the Rosenbergs testified. If he had testified in the main part of the prosecution's case, the Rosenbergs would have changed their story to include the trip to the photographers. That was the Rosenbergs' plan. Anything that is said only by the Greenglasses or Ellicher, they denied. But if there was an independent source that could verify an aspect of it, they would make up a story and claim that there was an innocent explanation. For example, Ruth Greenglass testified that Julius came to her house while her sister Dorothy Abel was present. Julius then asked Dorothy to take a book into the bathroom since he needed to talk to Ruth alone. He then gave Ruth instructions related to Gold picking up the documents when he came to Albuquerque. Julius can't deny this meeting or asking to talk to Ruth alone, since Dorothy Abel was there and would testify to it in court. So he concocts a story about Ruth whispering into his ear that she wanted to talk to him alone and asked him to ask Dorothy to leave. He then says that Ruth told him about David wanting to make some money by taking things from the army. Julius claims to assume he was stealing gasoline, by the way, not nuclear secrets. Here's another example. David Greenglass testified about a walk with Julius, where Julius quizzed him, making sure that he memorized all the details of his upcoming escape to Mexico. Rosenberg can't deny that this walk happened, since the Einzones, who are friends of David's, saw them. So Julius creates a story that they were out on a walk, but David blackmailed him for money so he could escape to Mexico. Julius also makes up a story about David demanding $2,000, and when he refused, David asked Julius to get his doctor to write him a fake smallpox vaccination certificate. This was to cover for the testimony of Rosenberg's doctor. Dr. Bernhardt told a story about an occasion when during one of the appointments, Julius asked him what vaccinations one would need if they wanted to travel to Mexico. Julius added that he was asking for somebody else who is a military veteran and thus has the basic vaccinations given out when one enlists. Ellicher testified about how Julius called him out of the blue when he was in Washington. He described a dinner at his house and also claims that Julius accompanied him and his wife to the Union headquarters where she was having some photos taken. At both those locations, Julius asked Elicher to give information about American weapons to the Soviets. Julius told a similar story. He mentioned going to Washington and feeling lonely, so he decided to look through the phone book for people who he went to school with. And, by sheer random chance, he ended up calling Elicher, who he was not particularly close to in college. Julius also admitted to a conversation about how the Soviet Union was doing the brunt of the work of defeating the Nazis. This was right after D-Day, by the way. Julius had to admit to that, since Elicher's wife was present for it. He also conceded to the trip to the Union headquarters, since there were many other people who would have seen him and Elicher together there. He then claims that all of the conversations about spying didn't occur. For those conversations, Elicher's wife was not present, so it is just Julius's word against Max's. Julius literally designed his testimony to deny anything that only the Greenglasses or Max Elicher could contradict. If anybody else, like Dorothy Abel or Dr. Bernhardt or the Einzones or Elicher's wife or all the people at the Union headquarters make a claim about something strange that Julius did, Julius just makes up a story to explain that behaviour and blames the strangeness on the Greenglasses. It's pretty clear what is going on here. Julius Rosenberg is not a reliable narrator, but his story makes a lot of sense when one sees it for what it is: the desperate attempt of a liar and a spy to mislead the jury. Ethel also designed her story in the same way. When testifying at the grand jury, she pleaded the fifth on everything. Now, that's her right, and we shouldn't assume guilt based on that. But at the trial, she tells her story, and just like her husband's, it only contradicts the testimony of the Greenglasses. She also makes the same mistake of denying the existence of the passport photographs. But again, that probably would have been part of her story if she had known about Schneider's testimony before getting on the witness stand. At the grand jury, she didn't know how much the prosecution knew, so she pleaded the fifth out of fear of being contradicted later. The prosecution were happy to point this out when they cross-examined her, and it certainly hurt her credibility. There is also the problem of communism. Both the Rosenbergs utilized their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination to avoid answering any questions about communism or their affiliation with the Communist Party. Now, obviously, we can't use that silence as proof that they were communists, but as a juror, it may feel like they are communists and trying to hide it, and even when instructed to ignore that thought, it just really seems like they're communists. Maybe they are afraid that denying it would open the door to the government presenting proof of their communist activities. Another possibility is that the Rosenbergs could also be charged with perjury if they lie on the stand by denying their communist beliefs and affiliations. But no matter the reason, it didn't make it look like the Rosenbergs were innocent and had nothing to hide. That brings us back to our main 5 witnesses, and you may have noticed that when I was presenting the defense's case, I didn't mention Harry Gold at all. That's for good reason. The defense chose not to cross-examine him. In his closing statements, Bloch justified that decision. Harry Gold got his 30-year bit, and he told the truth. I didn't ask him one question, because there is no doubt in my mind that he impressed you as well as impressed everybody that he was telling the truth, absolute truth. I guess trying to convince the jury that Gold was lying would have lost so much credibility for the defense that they decided they were better off just taking the hit and accepting the truth of what he said. To be fair, Gold's wasn't the worst testimony for the defense. Morton Sobell and Ethel Rosenberg were not even mentioned at all, and Gold never met Julius. But there is also a massive downside. By accepting his testimony as true, the defense allowed the uncontroverted testimony that Gold was told by Yakovlev to tell David Greenglass that Julius sent me, and that Greenglass told Gold that if he wished to get in touch with him, then he could do so by calling his brother-in-law Julius in New York City. Unless David has another brother-in-law named Julius, that proves that Julius Rosenberg is part of the conspiracy. It's a similar case for Elizabeth Bentley. The defense can say that maybe the Julius on the phone used a code name, but that would make Julius Rosenberg the unluckiest man in the world. What are the chances that Bentley interacts with a secret agent living in Knickerbocker Village who goes by the codename Julius, and also on a previous occasion picked up an envelope from a spy near Knickerbocker Village who was an engineer? Julius's exact occupation and Julius's exact living location. It is theoretically possible that these are 3 different agents, but realistically, they are clearly just Julius Rosenberg. The Greenglasses are also telling the truth. There is no denying that they passed nuclear secrets to the Soviet Union. The money that Gold gave them for spying went into their bank account, and the $4,000 Julius gave them to escape to Mexico was given to Ruth's brother, who used it to pay for David's lawyer. That $4,000 is $52,000 in today's currency. That's spying money. The defense also claimed that David Greenglass blamed the Rosenbergs to escape punishment. David has pleaded guilty and faces the death penalty too. It's completely up to the sentencing judge whether he lives or dies. You're not going to admit to a crime that might result in your own execution just because of a business feud with somebody. And you don't risk getting executed if you are trying to save your own skin. David Greenglass confessed when he was arrested, and he told the same story years later in court. He didn't wait to see what evidence the prosecution had and then crafted a narrative that looks the least bad for him. He told his story before he knew what the prosecution's evidence was, and his story lines up with the prosecution's other evidence. That is as strong as a sign as there could possibly be that his testimony is truthful. Harry Gold told the truth, David Greenglass told the truth, Ruth Greenglass told the truth, Elizabeth Bentley told the truth, and Max Ellicher told the truth. Every other prosecution witness was telling the truth, and they backed up crucial aspects of the main 5 people's stories. Ben Schneider, the photographer, told the truth. He showed that the Rosenbergs lied during their testimony. Morton Sobell did try to flee to the Soviet Union via Mexico. He didn't succeed, but people don't use fake names or send their post through intermediaries if they are not trying to hide. All 3 of the defendants are guilty. It was proven beyond any reasonable doubt. And with that, it was out of the lawyer's hands. The Rosenbergs and Sobell's fate rested completely on 12 of their peers. It must be an awful feeling, waiting in a courtroom while the jury decides your fate. During the trial, it was out of the defendant's control too, but one could at least see that something was happening. Watching the proceedings, there were wins and there were losses. Times when the defendants would have been certain that they would be set free, and other times when they were less sure. Now they are sitting in the room with nothing but their thoughts and worries to keep them company. The jury left for the deliberations room at 4:53 p.m. At 6:40, the judge informed everyone that he'd received a note asking for a copy of the indictment and the list of witnesses. Well, it's good to know that the jury is taking their job seriously. If they had been caught up in all the communist hysteria and they made up their minds before even hearing the case, they would have their verdict by now. The jury asked for the indictment and the list of witnesses. Surely They are going through the evidence and they will find that guilt wasn't proven beyond a reasonable doubt. At 8:10, the jury wanted the testimony of Ruth Greenglass read back. Specifically, they wanted the part where Julius Rosenberg first suggested that she ask David to steal the nuclear secrets. Surely, that's good for the defense. This is the section that Ruth was exposed for having memorized word for word. Bloch asked Judge Kaufman to also read the cross-examination of Ruth Greenglass. Kaufman denied that request. The jury came back into the courtroom and the clerk read the transcript of Ruth Greenglass's testimony, after which the jury shuffled back out to the jury room. At 9:42, the jury wanted all the exhibits. Surely that bodes well for a not guilty verdict. The lack of physical evidence is the largest hole in the prosecution's case. Surely they are just trying to convince some of the last most stubborn jury members to acquit the defendants. This will be over in no time. At 10:55, the judge informed everyone that he had received another note from the jury. It reads, "One of the jurors has some doubt in his mind as to whether he can recommend a leniency for one of the defendants. He is interested in knowing your mind on the matter." That's not good. That means that they will find at least one of the defendants guilty. All the hopes that the Rosenbergs could have had evaporate in an instant. They can comfort themselves by believing that maybe it is Sobell who will be found guilty. But deep down, they both know that it is Julius who is most likely to be found guilty. In response to the note, the judge brought the jury back out into the courtroom and read them the part of his charges about how the possibility of the defendant's punishment should not in any way influence the jury's verdict. The sentencing will be decided by the judge. The jury just needs to rule on guilt or innocence. Just past midnight, at 12:20, it became clear that there would not be a verdict that night. Judge Kaufman started making arrangements for a place the jury could sleep that night. She sent the jury a note asking if they had a verdict on any of the defendants. 15 minutes later, the jury sent back a note. "Judge Kaufman, we have reached our verdict on 2 of the defendants and prefer reserve rendering our verdict on all the defendants until we have complete unanimity." With that, the judge let the jurors get some rest. They will continue deliberating in the morning. What does this note mean? Is it Sobell or Ethel Rosenberg that they have not reached their decision on? Maybe the jury has already found both of them not guilty, but are deadlocked on Julius. Perhaps they think Julius is guilty, but they do not want him to receive the death penalty. That would explain the previous note. It's probably fair to assume that the Rosenbergs didn't get much sleep that night. The following morning, it's back into the courtroom, waiting for the jury to reach their final decision. Lots of nothing for about an hour, then all of a sudden, the jury have a verdict. After all the waiting, things start happening really quickly. The jury files back in, and before you know it, the verdict is read. We, the jury, find Julius Rosenberg guilty as charged. We, the jury, find Morton Sobell guilty as charged. We, the jury, find Ethel Rosenberg guilty as charged. For the past couple months, the Rosenbergs had been fighting for their freedom. Now they are fighting for their lives. And let me tell you, there is so much more of this story still to come.